The Royal Redwood Theatre buzzed with excitement as vocal warm-ups and stage door chatter filled the cavernous old building. Carpenters hammered away at last-minute set pieces while costumers scurried backstage with gowns draped over their arms. This was the final night of rehearsals for the grand production of Moonlit Serenade, the latest sensation meant to captivate audiences for weeks to come. In the center of the swirling chaos, two figures stood out, each holding a script with poised self assurance. Their names were known to every theater lover in the city: Julian Cross and Alexis Rydell. They had been cast as the leads, each rumored to detest the other as much as they loved the spotlight. Julian was tall and dashing, his voice full of languid charm. He moved with confidence like he was born for the stage. Alexis was equally captivating, a whirlwind of fiery energy whose every gesture seemed to speak a language of its own. Both had soared to their positions through grueling auditions and high-profile roles, forging reputations as unstoppable talents. Their mutual animosity had begun the moment they shared a stage years ago, an ill-fated production of The Taming of the Shrew. In that production, every scene felt weighted by the tension between them, from accidental jabs during stage combat to pointed remarks about who had the bigger dressing room. Their rivalry became folklore within theatrical circles. Now they found themselves together again, thrust into the leading roles of a show that demanded them to play deeply in love. Director Sheila Pembroke had insisted they set aside their personal differences. Yet even on that final rehearsal night, resentment simmered just beneath the surface. Few cast members whispered that the friction might be good for the performance. Cracks of thunderous passion could translate well on stage, especially for a romantic production. Others worried it would ruin everything if they couldn't align themselves in harmony. "Places," Sheila called, her voice echoing from the front row of empty seats. "We're running Act One from the top." Julian and Alexis traded frosty glances as they moved through the darkness to their starting positions. Behind the plush red curtain, the dusty smell of the stage mingled with the faint perfume of old costumes and fresh paint. The hush before the music was always the sweetest anticipation, a reminder that anything could happen in live theater. As the overture swelled, they each took a quiet breath. Then, on cue, the curtains rose. Julian had prepared for this role tirelessly. His mornings began with vocal exercises, and his afternoons were occupied by hours of choreography and blocking. At night, he pored over his script, memorizing lines with perfect inflection. He believed absolute dedication was the only route to greatness, a principle that set him apart from ordinary performers. But across from him, Alexis was just as committed, though in her own passionate style. Her lines were memorized almost instinctively, her role reflecting a fierce, natural flair. Julian found himself both irritated and fascinated by the way she seemed to inhabit her character, without the same regimented diligence to which he subscribed. During Act One's key scene, they circled each other under the glow of the stage lights, two star-crossed lovers introduced at a grand ballroom. The script demanded they waltz together, eyes locked in a tender moment of budding infatuation. Instead of sweet glances, they exchanged near glares. The friction was dense enough to notice from even the farthest seat. Yet, ironically, the forced tension gave the scene a crackling energy that the director praised afterward. "You two are electric," Sheila exclaimed during the break. Alexis mumbled something about forced chemistry, and Julian rolled his eyes. Despite their friction, they were undeniably captivating to watch. Stagehands, lighting technicians, and fellow actors paused to witness their intense performances, all enthralled by the heat that passed between them. Behind the curtains, stray set pieces lay scattered. Racks of sequined costumes, trailing feathers and bits of lace, divided the backstage into fluctuating pockets of privacy. Julian dodged through them, heading for the corner where he usually sipped water during breaks. That's when Alexis, just as determined to grab a moment to herself, nearly collided with him around a narrow corner. Her nose practically hit his chest, and they both recoiled. Waves of tension reverberated in the cramped space. "You should watch where you're going," she remarked in a clipped tone, although neither of them had truly been paying attention. Likewise, he shot back, voice cool. They studied each other in the half light, she flushed from rehearsal and glistening with a light sheen of perspiration. He, his hair slightly disheveled from the energetic dance sequence. She had to admit to herself that the line of his jaw, tense though it was, lent him a certain appeal. He, for his part, noticed the fire in her eyes that never seemed to waver, and something about that made his pulse quicken. Before either could break away from the charged moment, Sheila's call summoned them back to the stage. That night, Alexis stayed late to run lines alone. The echo of her own voice in the empty theater was both comforting and haunting. Shadows of the set loomed behind her under the minimal work lights. Earlier, the entire cast and crew had departed. However, she had entered that heightened, almost meditative state of wanting every syllable to ring perfect. Soon she realized she was not alone. A rustling sound came from the dark rows of seats. Not terrible, came Julian's voice through the dim hush. He emerged from behind the seats, script in hand. Alexis stiffened, startled. I wanted a quiet place to review these notes, he added, gesturing with a handful of marked up pages. Didn't expect anyone else to be here. She gazed skeptically at him. Didn't want to leave until I was absolutely sure of this monologue, she said. The lines don't feel right. The character's heartbreak is more than the script addresses. I thought maybe some extra reflection might help. Julian nodded, stepping across the stage and setting down his notes on the edge. I know, he murmured. There's a layer to these characters that could be richer, might need some off-script work. Though it was a rare moment of agreement, neither wanted to break the unspoken truce with too much acknowledgement. Tentatively, they began dissecting the scene together, reading lines aloud and discussing motivations. Text in hand, they explored expressions of longing they believed the script implied but didn't fully explain. The process felt oddly intimate. Their usual armor of competitiveness seemed to slip away. For a brief interlude, they were simply two artists trying to bring authenticity to their roles. Their voices melted softly in the dimly lit space, forging an unplanned harmony that neither would admit out loud. When midnight approached, Alexis glanced at her phone and realized how late it was. Julian seemed reluctant to leave, fiddling with his script as though wanting more time to shape the scene. Eventually, the prospect of the next day's early rehearsal forced them out. They parted ways with measured politeness, but each walked away bearing the quiet seed of new respect. Days passed, and the big opening night drew near. The glitzy chaos of final dress rehearsals swept everything into a frantic blur of costume fittings, last-minute set changes, and repeated cycles of performing the same scenes again and again. Through it all, Alexis and Julian found themselves slipping into small pockets of collaboration. They started to discuss motivations during breaks, occasionally finishing each other's thoughts on how best to express certain emotions. Their synergy on stage began to shift from forced electricity to a warmer authenticity. Observers noted a subtle difference. They leaned into each other's presence, rather than locking horns. Yet in public, they maintained their veneer of rivalry. Habit and pride kept them from admitting their changing perceptions. They still traded sarcastic comments if there were other cast members around, but behind the curtains, separated from the watchful eyes of the director, they allowed themselves fragments of honest conversation. Over time, these moments built towards something neither could quite define. One afternoon, a mishap called them into an unexpectedly intimate scenario. Alexis, while practicing a tricky dance, twisted her ankle slightly on a loose floorboard. Julian happened to be backstage and saw her stumble. He rushed forward and caught her before she fell completely, his arms grasping her waist in a moment of alarm. For a fraction of a second, they looked at each other, hearts pounding. She could feel the warmth of his chest, and he could smell the faint lavender in her hair. It was fleeting, but that single breath of closeness lingered. Are you okay? He asked, voice urgent. Yes, my foot, she replied, wincing but trying not to show weakness. He helped her to a nearby chair, kneeling to inspect the ankle. Despite her pride, she couldn't deny the relief she felt in that gentle concern. After a layer of tension passed, she attempted to stand, and he steadied her. Thank you, she said quietly, almost shyly. He shrugged, though a faint flush colored his cheeks. When other cast members bustled by, they sprang apart, each adopting an aloof composure like nothing had happened. But the quake in their hearts had been real. Neither forgot that precarious moment of vulnerability when rivalry gave way to earnest connection. At last, opening night arrived. The dressing rooms buzzed with final preparations. Makeup artists dusted eyes with shimmer and pinned hair into elaborate updos. Costumers ran around, ensuring each garment was pristine. With the house nearly full, the energy crackled and anxious excitement seized every performer. Alexis paced behind the scenes in her flowing lavender gown, shoulders tense with pre-show adrenaline. Julian, in his crisp, formal suit, adjusted his collar in a mirror, feeling that familiar swirl of anticipation. 15 minutes to curtain, and a hush fell upon the cast. They took their places, each breath measured, each heartbeat quickening. Stepping onto the stage for the first scene, Alexis and Julian launched into the story's opening beats, capturing the audience's attention with graceful movements and crystalline voices. Their prior hostility had always lent fire to their performances, but tonight that emotion had transformed into a mesmerizing undercurrent of layered intensity. Everyone could sense the energy. The two leads weren't just reciting lines, they were living each moment, making the audience believe in the love story unfolding. Applause roared through the acts, the set changes dazzled with twinkling lights, and the ensemble sang in perfect harmony. Still, at the core of it all remained the duo whose chemistry lit up the stage. When Act Two arrived, the pivotal love duet soared with a raw passion that many in the crowd swore they had never witnessed from these performers before. It was as if a barrier had broken, letting genuine feeling flood their voices. The final note hovered in the air, then gave way to thunderous clapping. During intermission, Alexis and Julian found themselves side by side in the wings, chests heaving from the exertion. Sweat beaded at their temples. Surrounded by fellow actors rushing to change costumes or prep for the next scene, they could only exchange a glance. In that silent moment, they knew something extraordinary had happened between them on the stage. Maybe it was the script that demanded it, or maybe it was a genuine spark of emotion that neither could deny. Dominoes after the curtain call, the thunder of applause reverberated long past the final bow. Flowers were thrown onto the stage. The audience rose to their feet, cheering in approval, enthralled by the production's brilliance. Alexis felt an exhilarating sense of triumph, her entire body tingling with the afterglow of performance. Julian was similarly electrified, like he was floating. They had never shared such a connection, even in their earlier shows. It was transcendent, rendering them breathless. Eventually, the cast filtered backstage, receiving quick congratulations, exclamations of, "That was phenomenal," and requests for photos. The entire place brimmed with celebration. A small after-party had been organized, complete with refreshment tables set up in a cordoned-off area behind the stage. The noise level soared as people toasted with sparkling drinks and reviewed the night's high points. Amid the flurry, Alexis slipped away in search of water. Her heart was still racing, and she needed a moment's peace away from the crowd. She had nearly vanished behind some set pieces when she heard Julian call her name. Turning around, she found him stepping through the shadows, still in costume, breathing just as unsteadily as she was. "You were incredible tonight," he said softly, looking her in the eyes. "I've never felt the audience so enthralled." She swallowed hard, unsure how to process the vulnerability in his voice. "You were marvelous too, She paused, trying to gather her thoughts. "I think something changed for us up there." He nodded, stepping closer. The swirl of noise from the party seemed distant. "I can't keep pretending it's just acting," he confessed. "That chemistry we felt, That was real, wasn't it? Her heart thumped. Suddenly, all those little glances, the late night script reading, the tender moment when he caught her, and the electric charge of their duets coalesced into a truth she could no longer ignore. She nodded, voice low. Yes, I think it was. Silence stretched between them, thick with longing and uncertainty. Then she felt him gently place a hand on her arm, his palm warm even through the fabric of her gown. Why did we do this for so long? He whispered. All that rivalry, all the competition. Her eyes flickered with unspoken regret. It was easier to focus on the feud than to risk being genuine, she said. But now, I, she exhaled shakily, I don't want to fight you, not anymore. Julian let out a trembling breath, leaning his forehead against hers. I don't either. Tension released, giving way to a wave of tenderness. Without another word, he cupped her cheek and pressed his lips gently to hers. The noise of the after party seemed to fade into the background. For a moment, the only thing that existed was the warmth of that gentle, long withheld contact. Word of the show's success spread quickly. Newspapers printed enthusiastic reviews, praising the lead's riveting chemistry. Publicists scrambled to field press requests, and the lines at the Royal Redwood Theater's box office grew steadily. The show was officially a smash hit. Each subsequent performance sparkled with the same intensity. But behind the scenes, the dynamic between Alexis and Julian transformed in ways neither had fully anticipated. They tried at first to keep their personal relationship hidden, partly out of habit, partly out of fear that it might spoil their carefully crafted public images. Renovated dressing rooms separated them, which made stolen moments of intimacy both thrilling and inconvenient. When they kissed behind the curtains, the hush of the wings enveloped them like a secret sanctuary. But soon enough, castmates took notice of the lingering smiles and the soft tension that replaced the once hostile remarks. One evening, about a week into the production's run, a group of ensemble members confronted them good-naturedly in the green room, leveling conspiratorial grins. So, when were you going to tell us? Teased Eliza, a dancer with a playful spirit. We're not blind, you know. Julian and Alexis exchanged a glance. An embarrassed flush crept to Alexis's cheeks. Tell you what, she tried, feigning innocence. But the cat was already out of the bag. The cast responded with warm, affectionate banter rather than the harsh judgments they had dreaded. Jokes were made about the pair's sudden shift from mortal enemies to lovebirds. Despite the initial self-consciousness, the revelation felt like a weight lifted. They no longer needed to hide behind bickering retorts, and the acceptance among their theater family felt surprisingly natural. While the show soared night after night, the real world crept in. Opportunities arose for both actors. Julian received an invitation for a high-profile film audition, something that offered the potential for major stardom. Meanwhile, Alexis was approached by a touring company that would travel across Europe, staging lavish musical dramas. These were dream opportunities, except they came at a precarious moment in their newfound relationship. One evening, after a triumphant performance, they lounged in a quiet corner of the darkened stage, the thick curtain serving as a protective backdrop. Alexis had confided her dilemma. If she took the European tour, it would mean half a year away. Julianne, in turn, mentioned that if he got the film role, he could be whisked off to another city for months of shooting. So, do we hold each other back? She asked. We've both worked so hard for these chances. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. We can't. This is what we've always wanted. But can we handle being apart so soon after finding this? She sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. The weight of it felt ominous. There's no easy solution, she said. We've spent years building our careers. Are we prepared to risk that? Julian pressed a kiss to her temple. I love the stage. You do too. But I wonder if part of what I love is the magic we create together. His voice wavered, reflecting a deep yearning. I don't want to lose you to rival projects or rival ambitions. A heavy hush stretched over them. Tomorrow was uncertain. This was the first time they faced a future that could separate them, just as they'd finally found one another. They remained there in silent embrace, enveloped by the faint echoes of footsteps leaving the theater. Neither wanted the moment to end. The next morning, they met for coffee in a cozy shop across the street from Redwood Theater. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the warmth, while theater posters and showbills plastered the walls. The conversation was subdued, each sip of coffee punctuating heavy thoughts. "I've thought about it all night," Julian began. "I can't ignore the potential of the film. It's my shot at a new frontier, but the idea of being away, my agent says it might not be that long, but who knows?" Alexis nodded, stirring milk into her drink. "And the European tour is a dream I once had, but maybe I've changed since I first craved it. Life has shifted. I don't know if traveling for so long is worth losing what we've only just discovered." The room felt charged with unspoken tension, as if both recognized they couldn't unravel this knot in a single conversation. Eventually, Julian took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Let's not make any decisions rushed," he said. "Our show still has several weeks in its run. Maybe we see how we feel when that's done." She exhaled, relieved to postpone the choice for a bit. "You're right," she murmured. "Let's give ourselves time." As the final weeks of Moonlit Serenade progressed, the pair reveled in their onstage chemistry, which only grew richer with each performance. Their offstage closeness strengthened, too. In stolen moments, they shared secrets, silly jokes, and the blossoming comfort of simply being together, free from the old defenses. Some nights after the show, they would sit with the stage lights dimmed to shadows, practicing new harmonies or dancing softly in the solitary glow of a single spotlight. Yet the looming question of their professional futures weighed heavier with each passing day. On the production's last night, an emotional wave swept the entire cast. Tearful farewells, promises to keep in touch, and raucous laughter about behind the scenes bloopers filled the backstage corridors. Alexis and Julian took their final bow to an overwhelming standing ovation, the audience clamoring for an encore. They delivered one last reprise of the romantic duet that had captured so many hearts, their voices weaving in tender sync. When the applause finally faded and the curtain dropped for the last time, the hush in the theater felt immense, as though the building itself was reluctant to let go of the story. Alexis and Julian stood clasping hands in the semi-darkness, hearts full. The question of what next loomed more vividly than ever. They locked eyes, each searching for some sign of resolution. On the deserted stage, they allowed themselves a private moment to say farewell to a show that had changed their lives. She looked at him, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I suppose tomorrow. We're both free now. Free to chase whatever is out there," she whispered, barely trusting her own words. Julian drew in a deep breath, gaze unreadable. "I think I know my answer," he said gently. "The film role might be there, or it might not. But what matters most to me is staying in this dance with you. We can find new shows, new stages, but it won't feel right if we push each other away." Alexis's heart felt like it might burst at his admission. She stepped closer, tangling her fingers in his. "I got a call earlier," she admitted. "I told the touring company I'd consider a shorter run or maybe a guest role, but only if I could come back to Redwood or somewhere close. My dream used to be traveling, but now I dream about creating more moments with you." The hush filled with a fragile, hopeful serenity. Then, in the center of the stage where they had fought and fallen in love, he lowered his head to kiss her gently. It felt like a promise. Hand in hand, they walked off that stage, not in rivalry, but side by side, hearts beating in tandem for whatever might come next behind the curtains. Their footsteps echoed through the backstage labyrinth, moving from the radiant world of performance into the quieter passages of real life. Though the future remained unwritten, a new script was already taking shape. And this time, it was a love story of their own making, far from the glare of stage lights, yet infinitely more profound.